My beloved child, come sit with me for a while, because I want to talk about something you rarely say out loud. The specific ache of feeling unseen even when you are surrounded by people. The quiet sense that you could disappear from a room and it might take longer than you would like for anyone to notice. I know this feeling intimately, and I want to speak directly into it tonight, not with easy reassurance, but with real presence, because loneliness deserves more than a quick platitude offered and then moved past. I want you to understand something clearly from the very beginning. Loneliness is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It is not proof that you are somehow harder to love than other people, or less interesting, or less worthy of genuine connection. Loneliness is simply an ache, a signal, much like hunger or thirst, telling you that something you were designed to need is currently missing or insufficient. It is not a verdict on your character. It is information about an unmet need, and unmet needs deserve compassion, not shame. I want to speak to the specific kind of loneliness that exists inside a crowd. The strange and disorienting experience of being physically surrounded by people while feeling entirely alone on the inside, as though a glass wall separates you from everyone else in the room. This is one of the cruelest forms loneliness takes, because it cannot easily be explained to anyone who has not experienced it themselves. From the outside, your life might look full, busy, even socially rich, while privately you carry a hollow ache that none of that apparent fullness actually touches. I want you to consider why this particular kind of loneliness is so disorienting. It often carries an added layer of confusion, because you cannot point to an obvious external cause. There is no dramatic rejection to name, no clear absence of people around you, simply a persistent internal distance that makes genuine connection feel just out of reach, even in moments that should theoretically satisfy it. I want you to note that this confusion does not mean you are imagining the ache. It is real, even when its cause is harder to identify than a simple absence of company. I want to speak to you about the difference between being alone and being lonely, because I do not want you to confuse the two. Being alone is simply a state, sometimes chosen, sometimes circumstantial, sometimes even restorative. Loneliness is different. It is the felt absence of genuine connection, and it can exist just as easily in solitude as it can in a crowded room. I want you to stop treating solitude itself as the enemy, because solitude, chosen wisely, can actually be a place of deep restoration, while loneliness, even in company, remains a genuine ache that deserves attention rather than dismissal. I want to speak now to the specific fear that keeps this loneliness quietly hidden. The fear that admitting it out loud will somehow confirm its truth, making it more real, more permanent, more embarrassing than it already feels privately. I understand this fear, but I want you to consider that loneliness left unspoken rarely improves on its own. Silence does not heal an ache like this. It simply lets it continue accumulating in the dark, growing heavier the longer it goes unnamed, unaddressed, and unshared with anyone who might actually be able to help. I want to speak to the specific exhaustion of performing connection you do not actually feel, smiling through conversations that leave you feeling emptier rather than fuller, nodding along in gatherings that technically qualify as social time but never actually touch the deeper hunger you are carrying. This performance is exhausting precisely because it asks you to maintain a version of yourself that appears connected while the actual felt experience remains isolated underneath. I want you to know that you do not have to keep performing connection you are not actually experiencing. Naming the gap honestly, even quietly to yourself first, is the beginning of closing it. I want to speak about the specific grief of outgrowing relationships that once felt central to your life. Friendships that mattered deeply in an earlier season but have since drifted, not through any dramatic conflict, simply through the slow erosion of time, distance, and changing circumstances. This kind of loss deserves genuine grief, even though it rarely receives the same acknowledgement that more obvious losses receive. There is no funeral for a friendship that simply faded, no ritual marking its ending, and yet the ache of its absence is real and worth honoring rather than minimizing. I want you to consider how much of your loneliness might actually be grief wearing a different name, unprocessed sadness over relationships that changed shape, people who moved away, seasons of life that no longer include the community they once did. Grief that goes unnamed does not disappear. It simply resurfaces as a vague, persistent ache that can feel disconnected from any specific cause, when in reality, it is often deeply connected to losses that were never properly acknowledged or mourned. I want to speak to the specific loneliness of being misunderstood, not necessarily unloved, but genuinely misunderstood. Surrounded by people who care about you yet consistently miss the actual depth or complexity of what you are experiencing internally. This particular loneliness is not solved simply by adding more people into your life. It requires people who are willing to actually understand you, which is a rarer and more demanding kind of connection than mere company or proximity can provide. I want you to consider that being fully understood by every person in your life was never actually realistic or necessary. Some relationships offer companionship without deep understanding, and that is not automatically a failure of the relationship. But I do want you to notice whether you have at least one or two relationships where genuine understanding is present, because a life entirely without this deeper kind of connection will remain lonely, no matter how many surface-level relationships surround you. I want to speak about the loneliness that comes specifically from unshared experience, the sense that no one around you has walked through quite what you have walked through, whether that is a particular loss, a particular diagnosis, a particular failure, or a particular joy that others simply cannot fully relate to. This kind of loneliness is real, and I do not want to minimize it by suggesting that someone, somewhere, has technically experienced something similar. Even shared categories of experience do not erase the specific isolation of living through your particular version of it. I want you to consider, though, that unshared experience does not have to mean unaccompanied experience. I am present with you in the parts of your story that no other human being can fully relate to, walking alongside the specific shape of what you are carrying even when no other person on earth has walked that exact same path. You are not required to find someone who has experienced precisely what you have experienced in order to no longer be alone in it. I want to speak to the loneliness of feeling like a burden, the quiet belief that your need for connection is somehow too much, too demanding, too inconvenient for the people around you to actually want to meet. This belief often keeps people from reaching out even when reaching out is exactly what would help, because the fear of being perceived as needy outweighs the discomfort of remaining isolated. I want you to examine this belief honestly, because it is rarely as true as it feels in the moment. Most people who love you would rather be asked for connection than left to wonder why you quietly withdrew. I want to speak about the particular loneliness of major life transitions, moving to a new place, starting a new job, entering a new season of life that leaves behind the community that used to sustain you. These transitions often require rebuilding connection almost entirely from scratch. And the process is slow, sometimes painfully slow, requiring patience that can feel unbearable when the ache of isolation is fresh and immediate. I want you to know that this particular kind of loneliness, while genuinely difficult, is also usually temporary, softening gradually as new connections slowly take root in unfamiliar soil. I want to speak to the fear that you have somehow lost the skill of connection itself, that too much time spent isolated has made you awkward, out of practice, less capable of forming the kind of relationships you used to form more easily. I want you to notice that connection is more like a muscle than a fixed trait, capable of being rebuilt with practice even after a long period of disuse. You have not lost some essential capacity for relationship. You have simply gone without exercising it for a while, and that can change with intentional, patient effort. I want to speak about the loneliness that lingers even within a marriage or a long-term partnership. The disorienting experience of being deeply committed to someone while still feeling unseen or unknown in certain specific ways. This kind of loneliness can feel particularly confusing because it seems to contradict the closeness the relationship is supposed to provide. I want you to know that even the closest relationships can contain pockets of unmet need, and naming these honestly within the relationship, rather than assuming they are simply unsolvable, is often the beginning of closing that particular gap. I want to speak to the specific loneliness of aging, watching your circle of close relationships gradually shrink as friends move away, priorities shift, or people are lost to death, leaving behind a quieter social world than the one you once knew. This is a real and often under-acknowledged form of loneliness. And I want you to know that building new connection later in life, while it requires effort that can feel daunting, remains genuinely possible at any stage of life. Not only in the seasons where connections seem to come more naturally, I want to speak about the loneliness of feeling fundamentally different from the people around you, holding beliefs, interests, or life circumstances that set you apart from your immediate community in ways that make deep connection feel elusive, no matter how hard you try. I want you to consider that finding your specific people sometimes requires looking beyond your immediate circumstances. Whether that means seeking out communities built around shared interests, shared beliefs, or shared circumstances that your current environment simply does not provide. I want to speak to the loneliness that follows public failure or public disappointment, the sense that others are now watching you differently, perhaps with pity, perhaps with quiet judgment, creating a kind of self-imposed isolation as you withdraw to avoid facing their perceived scrutiny. I want you to consider that most people are far less focused on your specific failure than your anxious mind assumes, and that withdrawing to avoid imagined judgment often costs you far more connection than the actual judgment, if it exists at all, would have cost you. I want to speak about the specific comfort available in reaching toward even one person, rather than trying to solve the entirety of your loneliness all at once. Loneliness often feels like an enormous, overwhelming problem requiring an equally enormous solution, when in reality even small, specific steps toward one genuine connection can meaningfully soften its weight. You do not need to rebuild an entire community overnight. You simply need one honest reach in the direction of connection, and then another, and then another. I want to speak to the fear of rejection that so often prevents this reaching in the first place. The belief that extending vulnerability towards someone will more likely result in disappointment than genuine connection. I want you to consider that while rejection is a real possibility, it is not actually the most likely outcome most of the time. And the cost of never attempting connection at all is a guaranteed continuation of the exact loneliness you are hoping to escape. Some risk is required in order to move toward the connection you are longing for. I want to speak about the specific role that community, in its broader sense, plays in genuine healing, not only close individual friendships, but a wider sense of belonging within a group, a shared practice, a shared purpose, a shared identity that extends beyond any single relationship. I want you to consider whether you currently have access to this wider sense of belonging, and if not, whether there might be a group, a practice, or a community you could intentionally seek out, even if the search itself feels uncomfortable at first. I want to speak to the loneliness that persists even within genuine faith, the quiet confusion of feeling connected to me in prayer and reflection, while still feeling isolated from other people in daily life. I want you to know that connection with me was never meant to fully replace human connection. Both matter, and both were designed to work together rather than substitute entirely for one another. I want you to pursue both, not settling for one while neglecting the other. I want to speak about the particular ache of watching others form connections easily while your own attempts seem to repeatedly stall or fail to deepen. I want you to release the comparison here as gently as you are able, because connection often depends on timing, circumstance, and compatibility that have little to do with your inherent worth or capability. Slower connection is not lesser connection, and comparing your specific timeline to someone else's will only add discouragement on top of an already difficult process. I want to speak to the specific value of small, ordinary interactions that do not initially feel significant. The brief conversation with a neighbor, the small kindness exchanged with a coworker, the recurring presence of a familiar face at a regular gathering. These small interactions, repeated over time, often slowly develop into genuine connection, even though no single instance of them feels particularly meaningful on its own. I want you to notice these small opportunities rather than dismissing them as insufficient simply because they do not immediately produce deep friendship. I want to speak about the specific courage required to remain open after being hurt by connection in the past, betrayed, abandoned, or disappointed by people you once trusted deeply. I want you to know that this fear of reopening yourself to potential hurt is entirely understandable, and I am not asking you to disregard genuine caution in choosing who you trust. But I do want to gently caution you against closing yourself off so completely that you prevent any future connection at all, simply because past connection once caused genuine pain. I want to speak to the specific loneliness some of you feel around identity, being one of the few people in your specific circumstances, whether that involves your background, your health, your family situation, or countless other factors that set you apart from the majority around you. I want you to consider that this kind of loneliness, while genuinely difficult, often has more available remedy than it initially seems, through specific communities built around shared circumstance, even when your immediate environment does not naturally provide it. I want to speak about my own presence in your loneliness, not as a replacement for human connection, but as a genuine companionship that remains available to you in the exact moments when human connection feels most absent. I am present with you in the quietest hours, the ones no one else witnesses, the private moments of ache that never make it into conversation with anyone else. You are not actually as alone in those moments as they feel, even when no human presence is currently available to you. I want to speak to the specific hope available even in a season of significant loneliness, the reminder that seasons change, that connection can be rebuilt, that the isolation you feel right now is not necessarily a permanent condition, but often a genuinely difficult chapter within a much longer story. I want you to hold on to this hope, gently, without forcing an artificial optimism that denies the real difficulty of your current experience, simply trusting that this particular ache, while real, is not necessarily the final word on your relational life. I want to speak about the specific practice of initiating rather than waiting, reaching out first rather than waiting to be reached, sending the message rather than assuming the other person is too busy or uninterested to want to hear from you. I want you to consider how much unnecessary loneliness accumulates simply because both sides of a potential connection are quietly waiting for the other to initiate first. You have permission to be the one who reaches first, even when it feels vulnerable to do so. I want to speak to the fear that initiating connection makes you appear desperate or overly eager, a fear that often keeps people from reaching out even when genuine desire for connection exists on both sides. I want you to release this fear as much as you are able, because most people receive genuine outreach with relief and gratitude rather than judgment, especially in a world where so many people are privately carrying the exact same loneliness you are carrying, simply waiting for someone else to make the first move. I want to speak about the value of shared activity as a doorway into deeper connection, joining a group centered around a shared interest, volunteering somewhere that matters to you, participating regularly in something that naturally brings you into contact with the same people over time. Connection often forms more easily around shared activity than through direct pursuit of friendship alone, because shared activity removes some of the pressure of forced conversation, while still creating the repeated contact that genuine relationship requires. I want to speak to the specific patience required in rebuilding connection after a lonely season, because genuine friendship rarely forms instantly. It typically requires repeated contact over an extended period of time, gradually deepening through shared experience and mutual vulnerability. I want you to expect this timeline honestly, rather than becoming discouraged when a new acquaintance does not immediately transform into a deep, meaningful friendship after only a few interactions. I want to speak about the specific relief available in simply naming your loneliness honestly to one trusted person, rather than carrying it entirely in private. I want you to consider who in your life might be safe enough to hear this honest admission, and I want to gently encourage you toward that conversation, even though it requires real vulnerability to have it. Naming loneliness out loud to even one person often begins to soften its weight in ways that private rumination alone cannot achieve. I want to speak to the specific worth you carry regardless of your current relational circumstances, because I do not want you to measure your value by the current state of your social life. Your worth was never contingent on how many close friendships you currently maintain, how quickly you form new connections, or how full your calendar happens to be in any given season. You remain fully valuable, fully loved, and fully worthy of connection, exactly as you are right now, in the middle of whatever loneliness you are currently experiencing. I want to speak about the specific difference between temporary loneliness and a deeper pattern of isolation that might benefit from additional support, whether that means counseling, community resources, or simply an honest conversation with someone equipped to help you navigate this particular struggle more effectively. I want you to consider seeking this kind of support without shame, recognizing that loneliness, especially when prolonged or severe, is a legitimate concern worth addressing with appropriate help rather than something you are required to resolve entirely on your own. I want to speak finally about the specific hope I hold for your relational life moving forward. Not a hope built on unrealistic expectations of constant, effortless connection, but a genuine hope that this particular season of isolation can become, gradually, a season of rebuilding, one small step at a time, one honest reach at a time, one small, ordinary interaction at a time, slowly forming into the kind of belonging you were genuinely designed to experience. I want you to hold this conversation gently, not as a checklist demanding immediate transformation, but as an invitation to notice the loneliness you carry, to name it honestly, and to begin, however small the step, moving toward the connection you were created for. This process takes time, and I remain patient with however long it takes for you to slowly find your way back toward genuine belonging. I want to speak about the specific loneliness of holding a secret, carrying something private you have never told anyone, whether out of shame, fear, or simple habit, and how this secret quietly builds a wall between you and every relationship you have, no matter how close those relationships otherwise feel. A secret held long enough begins to feel like the truest, most defining thing about you, even when it represents only a small fraction of who you actually are. I want you to consider that this particular wall, unlike many forms of loneliness, is one you actually have some power to lower, gradually, carefully, with someone genuinely trustworthy, rather than one that depends entirely on circumstances outside your control. I want to speak to the specific fear that comes before disclosure, the fear that once someone finally knows the truth you have been hiding, their view of you will shift permanently and unfavorably, that the relationship as you currently know it will not survive the honesty. I want you to consider that this fear, while understandable, often overestimates the damage disclosure actually causes and underestimates the relief and deepened intimacy that honest vulnerability frequently produces. Most secrets, once spoken to the right person, turn out to be more bearable in the light than they ever were in private darkness. I want to speak about the loneliness that shows up specifically around holidays and milestone moments. Birthdays that pass with fewer messages than you hoped for. Celebrations that highlight by contrast who is present in your life and who is not. Gatherings that remind you sharply of relationships you no longer have. These moments tend to intensify loneliness precisely because they are culturally marked as times when connection should be abundant, making its absence feel more pointed than it does on an ordinary, unremarkable day. I want you to be gentle with yourself specifically around these marked occasions, expecting the ache to intensify rather than being surprised or additionally discouraged when it does. I want to speak to the specific comfort of ritual, even small personal ritual, in seasons where communal connection feels scarce. A regular walk at the same time each day, a specific song played during a difficult commute, a particular way of beginning or ending each day that remains consistent regardless of who else is or is not present in your life. I want you to consider that ritual, even solitary ritual, provides a kind of steadiness that can meaningfully soften loneliness, not as a replacement for genuine connection, but as a companion practice while that connection is being slowly rebuilt. I want to speak about the specific difference between quality and quantity in relationships, because I know part of your loneliness may come from comparing the number of people in your life to the number apparently present in someone else's. A smaller circle of genuinely deep connection will almost always serve you better than a wide circle of surface-level acquaintance. And I want you to release the belief that a fuller-looking social calendar automatically means a less lonely internal experience. Some of the loneliest people maintain the busiest schedules, because busyness and genuine connection are not actually the same thing. I want to speak to the specific ache of watching a friendship slowly change after a significant life event on either side. A marriage, a new baby, a major move, a serious illness. Any of the countless transitions that can quietly shift the availability or depth of a relationship that once felt effortless. I want you to grieve this shift honestly, rather than pretending it has not happened, while also remaining open to the possibility that the relationship might eventually find a new shape rather than disappearing entirely, even if that new shape looks different from what it once was. I want to speak about the specific role vulnerability plays in deepening any relationship beyond a surface level, because connection rarely deepens through repeated pleasant but shallow interaction alone. It requires moments of genuine openness, sharing something true and slightly risky, allowing yourself to be actually known rather than only pleasantly present. I want you to consider, gently, whether you have been protecting yourself so thoroughly in your interactions that genuine depth has had no opportunity to form, even in relationships that have existed for a long time. I want to speak to the specific exhaustion of being the one who always initiates, always remembers birthdays, always sends the first message, always plans the gathering, while wondering privately whether the relationship would continue at all if you stopped carrying that responsibility. I want you to consider testing this honestly in at least one relationship, not out of resentment, but out of genuine curiosity about the relationship's actual mutual investment, trusting that the answer, whatever it turns out to be, is better known than left as an anxious, unspoken question. I want to speak about the specific comfort available in pets, animals, and other non-human companionship, which I do not consider a lesser or consolation form of connection, but a genuine source of comfort I built into creation on purpose. If a specific animal in your life offers you companionship during a lonely season, I want you to receive that comfort fully, rather than dismissing it as somehow insufficient compared to human relationship. Comfort is comfort, and I do not require you to justify or rank the sources from which you receive it. I want to speak to the specific loneliness of feeling forgotten by me, wondering during a difficult season whether I have actually noticed your isolation, or simply left you to navigate it entirely on your own. I want to answer this directly. I have not forgotten you. I am aware of every quiet evening, every unanswered message, every gathering you were not invited to, every ache you have carried without another person fully understanding it. My awareness of your loneliness has never wavered, even during the seasons when my presence felt hardest to perceive. I want to speak about the specific practice of hospitality, not the elaborate version requiring a spotless home and an impressive meal, but the simple willingness to invite someone into your space or your time in a low-pressure way, a simple coffee, a shared walk, an invitation to something you are already doing rather than an elaborate separate event. I want you to consider that hospitality offered simply and consistently often builds connection more effectively than occasional grand gestures, because consistency matters more than impressiveness in the slow work of building genuine relationship. I want to speak to the specific fear of being too old, too young, too far along in life, or too behind in some particular milestone to still be building new friendships. A fear that quietly convinces some people that meaningful new connection is only available during certain narrow seasons of life. I want you to release this fear plainly. Genuine friendship remains possible at every stage of life, and the specific timing of your current circumstances does not disqualify you from forming meaningful new relationships, regardless of what stage you currently find yourself in. I want to speak about the specific loneliness experienced by caregivers, those whose days are consumed by the needs of someone else, a child, an aging parent, a struggling spouse, leaving little remaining time or energy for their own relational needs. I want you to know that this particular form of isolation, born not from a lack of connection, but from an overwhelming excess of responsibility towards someone else's needs, is genuinely difficult and genuinely worthy of acknowledgement, even though it often goes unrecognized by those who only see the caregiving from the outside. I want to speak to the specific comfort of remembering that connection does not always have to be reciprocal in the same form to still be genuinely meaningful. That a friendship where one person offers more emotional depth and another offers more practical presence can still be a real and valuable relationship, rather than an unequal or lesser one. I want you to release the expectation that every meaningful relationship must look identical in its shape and contribution, allowing instead for the specific, varied ways that different people are able to show up for you. I want to speak about the specific danger of numbing loneliness through constant distraction, filling every quiet moment with noise, screens, or activity specifically to avoid feeling the ache directly. I understand the appeal of this strategy, but I want you to consider that numbing loneliness rarely resolves it. It simply delays the feeling, often allowing it to accumulate more heavily in the background while you remain outwardly occupied. Facing the ache directly, even briefly, tends to be more effective than perpetually outrunning it. I want to speak to the specific relief available in online or digital connection, which I do not consider inherently lesser than in-person relationship, though I do want you to notice honestly whether digital connection in your specific life is supplementing genuine relationship or quietly substituting for it entirely. Digital connection can be a genuine bridge toward deeper relationship, particularly for those whose circumstances limit in-person options. But I want you to remain attentive to whether it is actually satisfying your deeper need for connection or simply providing enough surface stimulation to mask the ongoing ache underneath. I want to speak about the specific courage required to leave a relationship or community that has become more depleting than nourishing, even when that relationship or community has been part of your life for a long time. I want you to know that remaining in draining connection out of fear of being entirely alone is not actually a solution to loneliness. It often deepens a different kind of isolation. The isolation of being present with others while still feeling fundamentally unmet by the relationship itself. I want to speak to the specific hope held out to those who have experienced repeated relational disappointment, friendships that ended painfully, community that excluded rather than welcomed, trust that was broken more than once. I want you to know that repeated disappointment, while genuinely painful, does not guarantee that every future attempt at connection will end the same way. Each new relationship deserves to be evaluated on its own terms, rather than being preemptively written off because of what previous relationships failed to provide. I want to speak about the specific gift of shared laughter, the way genuine, easy laughter with another person can momentarily dissolve loneliness more effectively than almost any other single experience. I want you to actively pursue moments and people who make you laugh, not as a trivial pursuit, but as a genuine and legitimate part of building the kind of connection that meaningfully counters isolation. I want to speak to the specific practice of showing up consistently, even when a particular gathering or group has not yet felt especially warm or welcoming. Genuine belonging within a group often takes longer to develop than a single visit can reveal, and I want you to consider extending a bit more patience toward new communities before concluding they are not a good fit, unless something about the environment feels genuinely unsafe rather than simply unfamiliar. I want to speak about the specific relief of releasing perfectionism from your relationships. The belief that you must present a flawless, entirely composed version of yourself in order to be worthy of genuine connection. Perfectionism in relationship tends to produce exactly the isolation it is trying to prevent, because it keeps your true, imperfect self hidden behind a curated presentation that others cannot actually connect with in any meaningful way. I want to speak to the specific reassurance that even brief moments of genuine connection matter, that you do not need an entire evening of deep conversation in order to experience meaningful relief from loneliness. A single honest exchange, a moment of real eye contact, a brief but genuine laugh shared with someone. These small moments accumulate over time into something that meaningfully counters isolation, even when no single instance feels dramatic on its own. I want to speak about the specific practice of gratitude for the connection you do currently have, however limited it may feel, rather than measuring your relational life only by what remains absent. I want you to notice and appreciate the specific people who are currently present in your life, however imperfectly, rather than allowing the ache for what is missing to entirely obscure what is actually already there. I want to speak to the specific reminder that your capacity for connection is not fixed or permanently determined by your current circumstances. Whatever pattern of isolation you have experienced up to this point does not dictate the entirety of your relational future. Genuine change remains possible gradually through consistent small steps, even after long seasons where connection has felt scarce or difficult to access. I want to speak one final time about the specific presence I offer you in the middle of whatever loneliness remains unresolved tonight. I am not distant from your ache. I am not waiting for you to solve it entirely before drawing near. I am already near, in this exact moment, in whatever quiet room or crowded space you currently find yourself in, aware of every part of the isolation you carry, and unwilling to leave you to navigate it entirely without me. I want to speak about the specific loneliness that surfaces around unmet expectations in family relationships. The quiet grief of realizing that certain family members will likely never provide the depth of understanding or support you once hoped for, no matter how much time passes or how many conversations you attempt. I want you to consider releasing the expectation that every family relationship must eventually become deeply close, while still remaining open to whatever genuine connection those relationships are actually capable of offering, even if it looks different from what you originally imagined family should look like. I want to speak to the specific ache of estrangement, whether chosen or circumstantial, from a parent, sibling, or other close relative, and the particular kind of loneliness this creates. One tangled with grief, guilt, relief, and confusion often occurring simultaneously rather than in any clean, resolved sequence. I want you to know that estrangement, even when necessary for your genuine well-being, still deserves to be grieved honestly rather than treated as a simple, uncomplicated solution that requires no further emotional processing. I want to speak about the specific loneliness of parenting, particularly in seasons when the demands of caring for young children leave almost no space for adult connection, conversation, or rest. I want you to know that this particular isolation, while often temporary, is genuinely difficult, and I do not want you minimizing it simply because it stems from a role widely regarded as meaningful and worthwhile. Meaningful work can still be genuinely isolating, and both things can be true at once. I want to speak to the specific comfort available in finding even one other person navigating a similar season, another parent of young children, another person managing a similar health challenge, another person walking through a similar transition. Shared specific circumstance often creates connection more quickly than general compatibility alone, because it provides immediate, concrete common ground that does not require extensive additional explanation or context. I want to speak about the specific loneliness of leadership or caregiving roles that place you in a position of being looked to by others rather than mutually supported by them. Roles where vulnerability feels risky because those around you are depending on your steadiness rather than able to offer their own in return. I want you to know that even in these roles, you are permitted to seek genuine support elsewhere, from peers in similar positions, from mentors, from me directly, rather than believing your role requires you to remain perpetually self-sufficient and unsupported. I want to speak to the specific relief of naming loneliness as a shared human experience rather than a uniquely personal failure. Nearly everyone experiences genuine loneliness at some point, often at multiple points, across the span of an ordinary life. I want you to release the belief that your particular loneliness marks you as unusually unlovable or uniquely deficient in some way that sets you apart from everyone else. It does not. It marks you as human. Living in a world where connection requires ongoing effort and is not automatically guaranteed to anyone regardless of how deserving they are of it. I want to speak about the specific practice of self-compassion during lonely seasons, treating yourself with the same gentleness you would offer a friend experiencing the same isolation, rather than adding harsh self-criticism on top of an already painful experience. I want you to notice the specific tone you use internally when reflecting on your loneliness, and I want to gently invite you towards softening that tone, replacing self-blame with the same patient understanding you would readily extend to someone else in your position. I want to speak to the specific temptation to interpret loneliness as permanent, projecting your current isolated feeling indefinitely into the future, as though this particular season will simply continue unchanged forever. I want you to notice this projection clearly, because it rarely reflects reality accurately. Seasons shift, circumstances change, and the specific loneliness you are experiencing right now is far more likely to be a chapter within a longer story than it is to be the permanent, unchanging conclusion your anxious mind sometimes assumes it must be. I want to speak about the specific value of professional support in navigating persistent loneliness, particularly when isolation has become deeply entangled with other struggles like depression, anxiety, or unresolved trauma. I want you to consider seeking this kind of support without shame if your loneliness has reached a point where it feels unmanageable through personal effort alone. Seeking appropriate help is not a failure to trust me. It is often exactly how trust in me practically expresses itself during a genuinely difficult season. I want to speak to the specific comfort of remembering that you are already known completely. Every private ache, every unspoken fear, every quiet hope for deeper connection you have never voiced to another person. I already hold all of it, fully, without requiring you to explain or justify any part of what you are carrying. This complete knowing is not distant or clinical. It is intimate, attentive, and genuinely caring, present with you in the specific texture of your particular loneliness, rather than offering only a generic, distant awareness of your struggle. I want to speak about the specific practice of choosing vulnerability incrementally, rather than all at once, testing trust in small, measured steps, rather than either withholding everything or oversharing everything immediately. I want you to consider that healthy connection typically develops through this kind of gradual, reciprocal vulnerability, each person slowly extending a bit more openness as trust is established, rather than through either extreme of complete guardedness or complete immediate exposure. I want to speak to the specific hope available even for those who have spent years, not just months, navigating significant isolation. I want you to know that the length of time you have already spent lonely does not determine how much longer this particular season must continue. Genuine change remains available regardless of how long the current pattern has persisted. And I do not want you believing that a long history of loneliness makes genuine connection somehow less accessible to you now than it would be to someone with a shorter history of isolation. I want to speak about the specific comfort of small gestures received from others. A text checking in unprompted, a small kindness offered without being asked, a moment of genuine attention given freely. I want you to notice these gestures when they occur, receiving them fully rather than dismissing them as insignificant simply because they are small. Small gestures, noticed and received, often do more to soften loneliness than their modest size would initially suggest. I want to speak to the specific practice of extending these same small gestures toward others who might also be lonely, checking in unprompted, offering a small kindness without expectation of return. I want you to consider that reaching towards someone else's loneliness often meaningfully softens your own, not because it distracts you from your own ache, but because genuine care extended toward another person tends to create real connection in both directions simultaneously. I want to speak about the specific reminder that loneliness, while genuinely painful, is not without purpose in your broader story. It often sharpens your empathy for others experiencing similar isolation, deepens your capacity for genuine presence once connection is eventually restored, and clarifies what you actually value in relationship once you have experienced its absence so acutely. I do not offer this reminder to minimize your current pain, but to gently widen the frame around it, trusting that even this difficult season is not entirely without meaning. I want to speak to the specific courage it takes to remain hopeful about connection after repeated disappointment, choosing to believe that genuine relationship remains possible even when your recent experience has repeatedly suggested otherwise. I want you to know that this hope is not naive. It is a genuine act of courage, choosing to remain open despite evidence that might tempt you toward permanent guardedness. And I want to affirm that courage rather than letting it go unnoticed. I want to speak about the specific reassurance that you do not have to solve your entire relational life tonight, or this week, or even this year. Genuine connection rebuilds slowly, and I want you to release any pressure to have this fully resolved on any particular timeline. Small, consistent steps taken over an extended period will accomplish far more than any single dramatic effort undertaken in a moment of urgency. And I want you to give yourself permission to move at the pace this genuinely requires. I want to speak finally to the specific truth that undergirds everything else I have said tonight, that you were never actually designed for isolation. That connection is not an optional luxury, but a genuine need woven into the way I made you, and that your current loneliness, however long it has lasted, is not evidence of failure, but simply an ache pointing you back towards something you were always meant to have. I want you to trust this ache rather than resenting it, letting it motivate the small, courageous steps that will eventually lead you back toward the belonging you were created for. I want to speak about the specific loneliness of feeling like an outsider within your own culture or community of origin, holding beliefs, values, or life choices that set you apart from the expectations placed on you by family or tradition. creating a particular kind of isolation even among people who share your heritage or background. I want you to know that this specific form of loneliness, the ache of not quite belonging to the group you were born into, is genuinely painful. And finding your place may require building new forms of belonging that honor both where you came from and who you have actually become. I want to speak to the specific ache of loneliness that follows a significant achievement. The strange and often unspoken experience of reaching a long-pursued goal only to find the moment feels hollow, unshared, or strangely disconnected from the celebration you expected to feel. I want you to know that this particular loneliness often reveals that achievement alone was never actually going to satisfy the deeper need for genuine connection, and that noticing this gap is not a failure of gratitude but an honest signal pointing you back toward relationships that matter more than any accomplishment could on its own. I want to speak about the specific isolation experienced by those recovering from addiction or significant personal struggle, where old relationships built around unhealthy patterns must often be released, leaving a genuine relational void before healthier connection has had time to form. I want you to know that this particular kind of loneliness, while difficult, is often a necessary part of genuine healing, and I want to encourage patience with the process of building new, healthier relationships to eventually fill the space the old ones once occupied. I want to speak to the specific loneliness of chronic illness or ongoing disability, where physical limitations sometimes make maintaining relationships more difficult, requiring more explanation, more accommodation, and more energy than others around you may fully understand or accommodate patiently. I want you to know that this particular struggle is real, and that finding relationships and communities specifically attuned to your circumstances, rather than expecting every relationship to accommodate your needs without any specific understanding, can meaningfully ease this particular form of isolation. I want to speak about the specific comfort of remembering that connection does not require constant contact to remain genuine. Some of the most meaningful relationships in a life involve long stretches of limited contact followed by an ease of reconnection that feels as though no time had passed at all. I want you to release the belief that infrequent contact automatically signals a weakened or insufficient relationship, recognizing instead that some genuine connections are simply built to withstand distance and time without losing their essential closeness. I want to speak to the specific loneliness of feeling unseen in your accomplishments or your struggles by the people whose recognition matters most to you. A parent whose approval never quite arrives. A mentor whose attention always seems directed elsewhere. A partner whose acknowledgement feels perpetually just out of reach. I want you to know that this particular ache is real, and I want to gently invite you to consider whether you are still waiting for recognition from a source that may never fully provide it. While genuine recognition might already be available from other people in your life, whose attention you have not fully allowed yourself to receive. I want to speak about the specific practice of widening your definition of who counts as meaningful connection, moving beyond only close, intimate friendship to include the quieter forms of belonging that also genuinely matter. A familiar barista who remembers your order, a regular walking companion, a coworker with whom you share easy, comfortable rapport. I want you to notice that these lighter forms of connection, while different from deep friendship, still genuinely contribute to a felt sense of belonging, and dismissing them as insufficient may be preventing you from receiving comfort that is already actually available to you. I want to speak to the specific loneliness experienced during seasons of doubt, when your usual sense of connection to me feels distant or uncertain, adding a spiritual dimension to whatever relational isolation you may already be experiencing elsewhere in your life. I want you to know that seasons of doubt do not disqualify you from my presence or my care. I remain close to you even during the seasons when you cannot clearly feel that closeness. And doubt itself, honestly wrestled with, is not the opposite of genuine faith, but is often simply part of its ongoing, honest development. I want to speak about the specific comfort of remembering that belonging is not something you must earn through flawless likability or constant impressive performance. Genuine belonging is available to you simply because you exist, simply because you are worthy of connection exactly as you currently are, without needing to first become a more polished, more accomplished, or more effortlessly charming version of yourself. I want you to release the exhausting belief that connection must be earned through constant performance, receiving instead the simpler truth that you are already worthy of belonging exactly as you are. I want to speak to the specific hope held out for you in this particular season, whatever shape your current loneliness takes, whatever specific losses or absences you are currently navigating, whatever length of time this ache has already persisted. I want you to know that genuine belonging remains available to you, not as a distant, unreachable ideal, but as a real possibility being built gradually through the small, courageous steps you are capable of taking even today, even in the middle of whatever difficulty currently surrounds you. I want to speak about the specific loneliness that follows a breakup or divorce, the disorienting experience of losing not only a partner, but often an entire shared social world. Mutual friends who quietly drift toward one side or the other, family gatherings that no longer include the same familiar faces, routines built around two people that now must be entirely reimagined around one. I want you to know that this particular loneliness is layered and complicated. Grief for the relationship itself tangled together with grief for the surrounding life that relationship once supported. And I want you to give yourself permission to mourn both, rather than rushing toward a resolution that ignores either one. I want to speak to the specific temptation after a significant relational loss to rush into new connections simply to avoid feeling the discomfort of the absence, rather than allowing genuine space for grief and reflection before building something new. I want you to know that some measure of solitude following a significant loss is not the same as unhealthy isolation. It can be a necessary part of genuinely processing what happened, and rushing past it in pursuit of immediate new connection sometimes simply delays grief rather than resolving it. I want to speak about the specific loneliness experienced by those who have never quite found their people, who have moved through multiple seasons, multiple communities, multiple attempts at friendship, without ever landing on a group or a person that finally feels like true belonging. I want you to know that this particular ache, the sense of searching without ever fully arriving, is genuinely exhausting, and I do not want you to lose hope simply because your specific search has taken longer or proven more difficult than it seems to have been for others around you. I want to speak to the specific value of examining honestly whether certain patterns in your own approach to relationship might be quietly contributing to this prolonged search, not to assign blame, but to identify anything genuinely within your control to adjust. Sometimes prolonged loneliness has less to do with a lack of available connection, and more to do with specific patterns, excessive self-protection, difficulty trusting, or unrealistic expectations placed on new relationships that can be gently examined and adjusted with genuine self-awareness and, if needed, professional support. I want to speak about the specific comfort of remembering that belonging does not require finding one single perfect community that meets every relational need at once. Genuine belonging is often patchwork, one group providing intellectual connection, another providing shared recreation, another providing emotional depth. No single relationship or community required to carry the entire weight of your relational life alone. I want you to release the search for one perfect, all-encompassing community, allowing instead for a wider, more varied network to gradually meet different needs in different ways. I want to speak to the specific loneliness of feeling responsible for other people's emotional well-being to such a degree that your own needs consistently go unspoken. A pattern that often develops in childhood and continues quietly shaping adult relationships long after its original context has passed. I want you to consider whether this pattern is present in your own relational life. And I want to gently invite you toward practicing the vulnerability of actually voicing your own needs, even when doing so feels unfamiliar or uncomfortable at first. I want to speak about the specific relief available in accepting that not every relationship needs to become deeply intimate in order to be genuinely valuable. Some relationships are meant to remain lighter, more casual, offering real but limited connection, and expecting every relationship to eventually deepen into profound intimacy places. Unnecessary pressure on connections that were never actually meant to carry that particular weight. I want you to release this pressure, appreciating each relationship for the specific, sometimes limited, kind of connection it genuinely offers. I want to speak to the specific comfort of knowing that loneliness experienced honestly and processed thoughtfully, rather than avoided or numbed, often produces a deeper capacity for genuine intimacy once new connection eventually forms. The self-awareness gained through honestly facing your own loneliness frequently becomes a genuine asset in future relationships, helping you show up with more authenticity and less fear than you might have carried into connection before this particular season of isolation began. I want to speak about the specific hope available even in the most prolonged and discouraging seasons of isolation. The reminder that persistence, however slow and however many setbacks it involves, tends to eventually produce genuine connection for those who continue reaching, continue showing up, continue extending small steps of vulnerability even after repeated disappointment. I want you to know that this persistence is not naive or wasted effort. It is the actual, ordinary shape that most genuine belonging eventually takes, built slowly rather than arriving suddenly and completely all at once. I want to leave you with one final thought before we close. Whatever isolation you currently carry, however long this particular season has lasted, however discouraged you have become about the possibility of genuine connection, I want you to know that belonging remains available to you. It may require patience, courage, and small repeated steps rather than one dramatic transformation, but it remains genuinely possible. And I am walking with you through every step of the process, present with you in the loneliest moments, and present with you as connection slowly, gradually, begins to return. I want to speak about the specific reassurance that you are allowed to want more connection than you currently have, without that wanting itself being evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with your life or your character. Desiring deeper relationship is not a flaw to be corrected or a weakness to be overcome. It is simply an honest reflection of how you were made, and I do not want you suppressing this genuine desire in an attempt to appear more self-sufficient than you actually feel. I want to speak to the specific comfort of remembering that even the strongest, most secure people still need genuine connection. That needing others is not a sign of immaturity or insufficient inner resilience, but simply an accurate reflection of how every person, regardless of strength or capability, was designed to function. I want you to release any lingering belief that truly strong people require little from others, replacing it with the more accurate understanding that genuine strength often includes the willingness to admit need honestly rather than hiding it behind an appearance of complete self-sufficiency. I want to speak about the specific practice of celebrating small relational wins along the way, noticing and honoring the moments when connection genuinely improves, even slightly, rather than only measuring your progress against some distant, fully resolved future. A slightly longer conversation than usual, an invitation extended and accepted, a moment of genuine laughter shared with someone new. These small wins deserve real acknowledgement, rather than being dismissed as insufficient, simply because the larger ache has not yet fully resolved. I want to speak to the specific truth that this entire conversation was never meant to instantly resolve every layer of loneliness you currently carry. Genuine change in this area unfolds slowly, through repeated small choices made over an extended period of time, rather than through any single conversation, however honest or thorough. I want you to hold what has been said here gently, returning to it as needed, rather than expecting it to produce immediate, complete transformation the moment we finish speaking. I want to speak about the specific presence I intend to remain in your life throughout this entire process. Not simply offering a one-time conversation and then stepping back to watch from a distance, but remaining genuinely engaged with you through every small step, every setback, every slow gain in connection you eventually experience. I am not a distant observer of your relational healing. I am an active, ongoing companion throughout the entire process, for as long as it takes. I want to speak about the specific loneliness that can quietly persist even after connection has been outwardly restored, a lingering wariness that keeps you from fully relaxing into new relationships even once they have proven trustworthy over time. I want you to know that this residual guardedness, a kind of aftershock from earlier isolation or earlier hurt, often takes longer to fade than the external circumstances that originally caused it. And I want you to extend yourself patience as this deeper trust rebuilds gradually, rather than expecting your internal sense of safety to catch up instantly with your improved external circumstances. I want to speak to the specific relief available in recognizing your own growth along this journey, noticing how much more willing you have become to reach out, to stay present in conversations that once felt uncomfortable, to tolerate the vulnerability that genuine connection requires, even if the external results have not yet fully matched the internal effort you have been investing. I want you to honor this growth honestly, rather than dismissing it simply because your relational life has not yet reached the fullness you are hoping for. I want to speak about the specific hope that belongs uniquely to you, not a generic reassurance borrowed from someone else's story, but a hope shaped around your particular circumstances, your particular history, your particular strengths and struggles in relationship. I want you to trust that this specific hope is not wishful thinking but a genuine promise, rooted in my ongoing presence with you and my active commitment to walking this entire process out alongside you for as long as it takes, without growing impatient or withdrawing partway through. I want to speak, before closing entirely, to the specific quiet fear that even this conversation will fade quickly from memory once the ordinary demands of daily life resume tomorrow. That these words will feel meaningful tonight but distant and inaccessible again by next week. I want you to know that this is a reasonable fear, since insight often does fade without reinforcement, but I want to invite you to return to these words as often as needed, treating them not as a single completed conversation, but as an ongoing resource available to you. Whenever the ache resurfaces and you need reminding of what remains true regardless of how you currently feel, I want to speak to the specific practice of writing down, even briefly, one small step you intend to take this week toward genuine connection. Whether that means reaching out to someone you have been meaning to contact, attending a gathering you have been hesitant to join, or simply naming your loneliness honestly to one trusted person. I want you to consider that a specific, written intention tends to be followed through far more often than a vague, unspecified hope. And I want to encourage you toward this kind of concrete first step, rather than allowing tonight's reflection to remain only an abstract, unattached feeling. I want to speak, finally, to the specific reassurance that none of this requires perfection in order to matter. An imperfect attempt at connection, awkward, uncertain, occasionally unsuccessful, still matters more than continued avoidance ever could. I want you to release the pressure to get this exactly right, trusting instead that consistent, imperfect effort, offered honestly over time, is genuinely sufficient to slowly rebuild the belonging you are longing for. Rest now in whatever measure of connection or solitude this evening actually holds for you. The ache you carry is real, and it deserves compassion rather than dismissal, patience rather than urgency, and honest attention rather than continued avoidance. You are not as alone in this moment as the ache sometimes convinces you that you are. I remain present here, in this exact quiet, aware of every part of what you are carrying and unwilling to leave you to navigate any of it entirely without me. Whatever tonight held, whatever tomorrow brings, whatever this whole season of loneliness eventually becomes, you were never asked to walk it entirely unaccompanied, and you never will be. That has always been true, and it remains true now, in this quiet moment, exactly as it will remain true in every quiet moment still ahead of you. Sleep well, and know that connection, real and lasting, is still coming, one small, honest step at a time. This is not an empty promise offered to soften a difficult night. It is a genuine commitment, held steady on my part regardless of how long the process eventually takes, regardless of how many setbacks occur along the way, regardless of how discouraged you occasionally become. I remain, patient and present, walking this entire journey with you until belonging is no longer merely hoped for, but genuinely, fully lived. That is my promise to you tonight, and it is a promise I intend to keep for as long as it takes, without wavering, without growing tired of the process, without ever once considering you too difficult a case for genuine belonging to eventually reach, and without ever forgetting a single quiet, lonely night you had to walk through before this promise was finally, fully realized.